Good evening. Welcome to Street Talk. Again, we don't have Father Russ here. I know he's on sabbatical for me, and he kind of put this in my lap. So, you know what? I get the great choice of choosing who comes here. And much like Matt Damon, I'm sorry, Anthony Giannatasio, I couldn't get you on this week. But we're going to catch up to you sometime after the election's all done with. But who I do have that I plan to have quite a long way back, was two of our wonderful women. One who is our statesperson on the show today, as far as she's currently a Board of Alderman member in the 1st District, Ellen Beatty.
Hello, Dominic. Thank you for having me.
And one, dangerous just like me, who's running as a candidate in the 1st District, Nija Phelps.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Also an Alderman candidate.
Yes, yes. So we're all going to kind of turn to you for a second, because you just are about to complete your first term.
Yes.
So we're hoping to get in, and I guess. What was your experience when you first came on the board? Because is this your first campaign?
Yes, I'm completing my first term. It's a 2-year term. We're elected every 2 years as an alder on the board from the 1st District. It's been fascinating, fun, hard work, and there's been a learning curve. I've met colleagues who have been superlative. And helped me a great deal. And I think we've accomplished a great deal. And I'll mention those if you'd like. I mean,
well, you know what? I love it, because you know what? You've made our job out campaigning so much easier.
Yes.
Because the city's really left in very good shape, better than any community, I think, that's going out there in the state of Connecticut. And certainly that much better than what our legislature and our governor has tried to put together here. But
the Board of Alders has worked very well with our mayor, and the Board of Finance, and the way the charter is written, and the city charter, and also the way the rules of the Board of Aldermen, we need one another. There's an interdependency that's very good there. The mayor has kept the city in stellar shape, but it's along with the Board of Alders, because the Board of Alders is a legislative body that enacts the budget and some of the changes that are co-authored together. So it's a very good reciprocity, I think, a very good team, and it holds Milford in good stead. I can give some specific examples of that. Well, specifically about the budget, all of the departments bring a budget to the mayor and to the board to the financial director, and have some input into developing those budgets in light of what constrictions or whatever the context is for the city. For instance, since January of 2017, we've had a hiring freeze, and that's in anticipation of budget struggles in Hartford. So even though Milford is in good shape, that was a prudent move. So then the department heads would bring forward their budget requests in light of that, knowing that there's a freeze on, or et cetera. And so there's much discussion with the finance director and the Board of Finance and the mayor before the budget comes to the Board of Aldermen. And we have the detail, and we're in on those discussions. Then the department heads and their chosen representatives, colleagues, come and present before the Board of Aldermen, and we listen to them and we question, as does, we have 15 alders, and right now we're a majority, 8 Democrats, 7 Republicans, but all of our Republican counterparts get an opportunity to ask about the budget, to challenge about the budget, to question about the budget, to make suggestions, and often that's done right there on the floor of the City Hall chamber, and it's televised. So it's very, very interesting, and that's where I'm talking about the learning curve. You really learn a great deal. And as an alderman, as an alder, I've gotten a chance to go around we have committee assignments, commission assignments, liaison assignments, but also you can go around and visit the centers, the agencies, the commissions, and also all of the, by law, all of the minutes for all of these agencies and commissions are posted online. We receive them.
Some like 36 to 40 different commissions?
Yes,
Wow.
yes, yeah. Well, not, yeah.
Somewhere in that range.
Yeah,
I don't
yes,
have the
yes.
exact number,
Maybe
but
even more. But
Wow.
you know, they're all some are appointed by the mayor. A lot of bipartisan representation. There are rules for how those commissions and committees are established. But so there's much to learn, and there's a lot of information out that is transparent. Plus, we have the televised Milford government.
so
love that.
Which
I
is,
heard stories about what life was like before there was TV.
Oh, I've heard them too.
I've heard.
I heard they used to have a newspaper reporter that would sit in the meetings, but they would leave at specific times, and that's apparently
Afterward.
that's apparently when the brawling
When the
all
brawling-
started. So I think you know what transparency is the best
Oh,
for
yes.
government. I know I can go online at the Milford government website, and I've done this. And looked at the budget. Like I can go through like line item by line item. I know that in the end version, because our state situation was so up in the air, I know that like say $1.9 million was cut in the final version of the budget that you guys went through in possible anticipation of losing some funding from the state. That's accessible to everybody. The mayor put this stuff in the local newspaper for everybody to take a look at. I mean, the fact that we're in good financial shape is because I think we have so much transparency. And there's, you know,
And
people-
short-term
Well,
planning and long-term planning, both of those are important.
I've heard those stories too, that occasionally a few alders could act up and it
Yeah.
got to be quite vibrant. So I haven't seen that as much. So that would be saying that the televised hearings diminish some of the authenticity. But I think the long-range outcome of making everything transparent, including the public hearing and the people who stand before us, is well worth it. And I should say, it's been a great time that I fell into being an alder for the first time, because we did get the excellent ratings from the Standard & Poor's, which enabled us then to borrow money and bond money at very good interest rates.
Well, it enabled you guys to save over $1 million in just redoing the bonding.
Exactly, and that was the mayor driven. He was very nimble, and Peter, our financial chief officer, is very talented and competent as well, and the city attorney, and they were able to renegotiate all those and bring them forward to us. So we have a surplus. We have a mill rate that's a little bit down. We have property taxes that have maintained their own or been a little diminished over a 2-year period. Our roads are paved. The schools are good. It's a very good time to have walked into being an alder. But it's been hard work, and I say this humbly, but I take it seriously, and one needs to stay informed. And there are issues there.
Well, I'm sure. I know there are issues. But I know one of the first things that you told me, and I actually did go through this. I went and looked at the city charter, like you actually suggested, to get a good perspective. I also got
Of
the
what
large
the-
realization that our city charter hasn't really changed since about 1974. And I know.
And you want to change it, don't you?
No,
I do.
I think that I think any document that you have is a living
It's a
document,
Should
living
be.
document.
and it should be revisited. And I know there's certain parts of the community that doesn't necessarily want to revisit it, even though our mayor has been magnanimous in trying to put forward, some equal, equitable representation within that. And some people are afraid when you open up the door that, Pandora's box is going to be open. But I think there should be some things, much like they have like planning and zoning. I think to come up every couple of years and constantly, have to go through an election cycle is difficult. And I think it takes you a little while to be able to learn any position that you go into.
Thank
And at the point that you've learned it, you're again up having to go for an election. So I think that's something that I hope that changes.
Nija, who is a candidate in the 1st District for Alder, the same position with me, and there's room for 2 Democratic Alders in there. We've talked about this. The mayor, I think that we talk about the charter. It's not as if it's frozen, and we refer to it. As a new alderman, as a new alder, I was given the charter and really looked at it, and it really helped to understand. Yesterday, in conversation, because something came up, I asked the mayor, and the 2 of us sat together. We were out canvassing, and he showed me the link where the charter was, because I had a question. It was actually about this interview and talking about it. People have asked, for instance, the charter talks about what happens to the budget in relation to the Board of Ed. It tells the functions of each of the departments, what the registrar of voters does, etc. So in that way, it could be opened and it can be changed. But once you open it, there is the risk that then you would have more changes than you wanted because of that. And I should mention on the Board of Alders that the registrar, the city town clerk, has a seat on the Alder Board, and she attends every meeting. And that's a strength of this aldermanic board. It's different than towns with selectmen. It's different than towns with city council. Every meeting, and often we ask the city attorney for advice right in the middle of a discussion. What does this mean? The roofs are going on and the bonding and he'll tell, well, the agreement is such. And then Pete Eredici sits there for finance, and he is often called upon to answer questions. And the mayor sits at every meeting. So those 3 individuals attend, along with the town clerk, who is responsible for making sure that that's recording. She doesn't actually do it. There's a secretary, Kathy Kennedy, but all of that is recorded, and it's sent out in a timely fashion. Postings are done. I'm surprised at the consistency of the competency in the town. I've been on boards where the minutes were late, or they weren't delivered right, or many, many different things can happen. This is done according to Hoyle.
One of the things that I know that I like about our aldermanic committee is it's not all lawyers.
No.
I mean, you guys, and I know I am from a different background, and I just wanted to get into that so the voters of your guys' district know what your experience is and where you come from and what you bring to the table.
Well, I appreciate that the Board of Aldermen has a collaborative process, and I think that's definitely a strength that Milford has. And it doesn't make sense to me that all towns and cities aren't run that way. They have certain terms, and the term in Milford is we have a mayor week.
Yeah, I know.
Which, not great wording, but I think it's important that we don't have the mayor as, a tiny king who's ruling over everything. I think that's really important.
Yes, I call that Joe Ganism. But
absolutely.
I would say
I used to live in Bridgeport, and I 100% agree with that.
we all want a benevolent despot, but usually
usually despots
despots aren't. And
They're
so
usually
I wouldn't,
dictators.
you're technically correct that compared to other models, it's a mayor weak, Alder strong. But I think that that is not to diminish, in this sense, he in any way,
Right.
but the role. But it is very different. I'm from another area in the country, and councils, councilmen, councils, selectmen are run very differently. And in Milford, the alders have legislative authority, and it's not just about the budget, it's about ordinance and approving agreements that the city enters into for bonding for usually major public works, sewer, shore.
I watched that last month.
Yes,
and
and we-
they were. This was something that I actually followed up from, because I remember when this was going through legislation about the microgrids.
Yes.
And that we're going to have, because
a
after
good
Sandy,
example.
there was a lot of loss of power, and so we want to ensure that our infrastructure, that there were places that we have our own sort of grid,
Right.
because when multiple poles go down, as did in Sandy, they shut the power down. They
Yeah.
de-energize
Yep.
like the system, and that leaves everybody, even if you might have been connected, without power. And so having a microgrid, the way that they have it set up, they have City Hall and all the Parsons buildings available to be able to shelter. In place, and it's just it's smart policy.
I was going to say it's smart planning, and that's the other thing, is that short-term planning and long-term planning are both important, and it takes work, and I think Milford's been really good about that. The reason my husband and I moved here is because Milford made the most sense for us. Infrastructure is really important to us. I was a secretary at a transportation center at Purdue University for 5 years, and as the secretary, when I started, I didn't think I would learn necessarily that much about transportation infrastructure, but I have. So if I'm with someone in the car and they say, "Oh, why is this a stop sign? It should be, a stop light, or it should be roundabout," and I say, "Well, actually, it's probably because a study was done and they figured that this made the most sense for the traffic flow of this area." They're like, "What?" And I said, "Well, that's how transportation works. That's how infrastructure works." And it's not exciting to talk about, so a lot of times people don't pay attention, but it's really important. It's a big part of what makes a city not just function well now, but continue to function in the future. Young people don't want to stay and make a home somewhere that doesn't have good infrastructure. Older people will move away once they retire if they live in a place that doesn't have good infrastructure,
And this is an area I'm interested in. Smart development of cities, small cities, how they're going, transit.
I love that term.
I was on the transit committee, and smart development really echoes resonance for First District in particular, because that's the area left to develop, and we really have some opportunity there to be fiscally sound, thinking long term, but also to create an area that young professionals want to live in. I have a background. I want to talk a little bit about what else along the alders, how they utilize people. I've been impressed, really, by each of the individuals. It's all volunteer time. How much they care about the city. And we've all, done civic duties all our lives, had discretionary time that we've given to causes and boards. But I think on the city government, local city government, I'm amazed. And I don't only mean on the alder boards, I mean on the Board of Ed and the planning and zoning and everywhere. But anyway, they do utilize our backgrounds. I have a background in both healthcare and education. So we are assigned, we're liaisons to different groups and sometimes to committees. So, for instance, in the beginning, I was put on the Public Health and Safety Committee. And those are things that are very germane to what's important to the health of our citizens. And that has been very, very interesting, and I find the people very accommodating. And now moving forward, I am a place on the Ordinance Committee. And tonight, for example, we have an ordinance that the aldermen are bringing forward. The Ordinance Committee is bringing forward, and it's about disposal of waste from not just fracking, that's one type, but all exploration of natural gas, petroleum, and the waste products that come from invasive techniques into the earth and where that is stored. And so this ordinance is a prohibition against that. And so there's a lot of homework done. It's well written. There's a lot
easy to
of
read.
Yep, and it's very pointed and very good, I think, and very, very important at this and very timely. And so that came through. That actually came through the mayor as his thinking long term. The rest of the state is also doing that. So we benchmark. And there are a couple of ways. We have a trade organization, CCM, so that as an alderman you can keep, ongoing learning, lifelong learning, how to do a budget, how to run a municipality, how to whatever they have there. But also from that association, you learn what other towns are doing with ordinances about, for instance, Milford needs a noise ordinance. Or I should say, it doesn't have one. That's my opinion.
I didn't know that.
I'm not speaking for anybody else.
I do. I actually wrote. I
So-
wrote to everybody
So
after an
it's
experience
time.
with this. Yes.
So maybe you could help us, but one way we would do that is to benchmark with other towns. What does
Right.
Stratford do? What does
Yep.
a town of comparable size do? What does a town that have motorcycles do? Not all towns. Cheshire might not have
Right.
a motorcycle problem. We have more roads. We have beaches.
I think their benchmark for that is if you're sitting in the cop car with the windows up and you can hear it. It's too loud. That's the general benchmark.
One of the problems that comes up with any ordinance, if it's a nuisance ordinance, even if it's very important,
It's enforcement.
It's enforcement, and you then are giving extra duties in a time of retrenchment to your law enforcement personnel to be responsible. So that's why it has to be
I
weighed.
tend to look
so-
at it slightly differently, and I had several conversations with several different alders going back and forth when I brought this whole issue up. I like to think that there are some things that you put in place that set the benchmark. If you're having like an extravagantly loud party, you have a cutoff time.
Right.
Because if people don't know that there's rules in place,
Then how can they act
be
appropriately?
able to act or follow them, or having no people doing like building and other things along those lines before a certain point in time. I go to doors now and I hear people, discussing this with me, and I'm like, yeah, these are the rules that I think a community agrees to.
Right.
Whether they're 100% enforceable, or you're going to be calling your police officer out every 2 seconds for something, I think people have to have guidelines in order to be able to go from.
But you do have, I agree with you, but you do have to have all the stakeholders involved.
yeah.
Because if you have an ordinance and one big stakeholder is who's supposed to enforce that ordinance isn't on board, then you give license to. But we're getting there, and I think that things come up. Now, as an example, in this last year, the Ordinance Committee brought forward, and it was discussed, the Board of Aldermen, there's a public hearing. I'm going over this just so you get a sense of how
Sure.
these things are done. And then it was approved by the entire Board of Alders to make a modification to the bicycle riding
Yes.
ordinance in the town. And that stemmed from nuisance complaints that there were young people who were on bikes who may have been, it went from reports of menacing to reports of just being out of control and nothing to do. And law enforcement really came to ask the alders for more tools so they could be within their lawful limits. And yet, when they got somebody who was really abusing and disobedient, if you will, that they could wind up. And it's a stepwise thing, but they can confiscate a bike, bring it to the police station, so that an adult has to come and retrieve it. And as an example, for me, I took that very seriously. Maybe my parenting philosophy is to give people as much room as possible, before. And I also, because of my interest in small cities, want very much to educate that we share the road with bikes.
Mm-hmm.
The taxes for the roads are for both bikes. Yeah.
Yep.
So I was very reluctant, really had to be convinced. But it's not about me. I'm elected by the people. And there was enough evidence. And we can revisit it. We can revisit that in a year. But anyway, so that's an example where, with due diligence, they did their job, they passed it, and it seems to be working.
Well, that's actually the joy that I look at in going and campaigning and knocking on doors right at the moment, because I get to see different areas of the city, and I actually do ride my bike all up around like the different hills and everything else. So I did get to see some stuff. But like yesterday, I was up beyond Gulf Beach, up by Welsh's Point, and there's a group of streets which have a flooding issue. Mm-hmm. And they flood because their sewers are actually at the lowest point in the city, and they go out to Long Island Sound, and they're supposed to have like a valve that opens and closes depending upon the tide. Mm-hmm. So these people are telling me, they're explaining to me like the big issues that are coming up, like as far as this is where they had to raise all the houses. This is like, and they're supposed to do a big project.
Those areas need to be cleaned out in order for that.
Well, this is what I did. Was, I walked over there. I went out. Fortunately it was low enough tide. I like walked out on one of these things. I'm like taking a look at like the valve, and I'm like, oh, I see what the issue is. The way that they have this set up is there's 2 pivot points, and so when it goes to shut, it doesn't shut all the way. And I go to the next towns over, the next streets over, and theirs is the same situation, except it's so gunked up with like sand and stuff
that it
can't close all the way, and it remains open. And here I'm talking to the 80-year-old lady who's like, I got to move out of like my house in wintertime because
she can't.
Well, this is very good to bring up, and now I'm going to make a plug for Public Works. They really have, I don't know the number, but say there are 1,000 catchment areas and these locks in certain areas. They all have to be cleaned out, maintained. There's only a certain amount of human power, a certain amount of trucks. So this is coming up all the time. These are maintenance issues that need to be done. So it's not simple if you and I can go and pull the grass out and get the dike to work. They need to be maintained in a safe way with the right equipment. And that's something, as an example, that director of Public Works, Brian Anderson, is the committee chair. There's a committee for the Public Works.
First person I emailed.
They meet. They have Republicans and Alders. Those meetings are very interesting. I would love to attend. I'm interested in that for reasons I won't go into. But they're on a night when I have another conflict. But then he would really then. That should come up in the next budget hearings, that there's some long-term thing. How do you take care of all of those catchment areas that are so critical to drainage?
I did sit
and
with
stagger the replacement of
Right.
with
so they're on
Chris,
top of that, Chris Sally.
and he does an excellent job. And to hear all the different things that they have and they're involved in is just it's staggering. And
they need to stagger the cleaning.
But it is. I mean, this is some of where you have to make some decisions with things. I mean, he said, look, I know we're on a budget freeze. I'm technically down, X amount of employees that we haven't like hired on for, and we have a lot of projects, and I think, government is about where the rubber hits the road. It's about infrastructure. It's about maintaining that infrastructure. They do a great thing, because I know I've heard about this a couple of years ago in Bridgeport. They do what they call a hot in place. New way of resurfacing roads. So what they do is they have the big flames like down. They heat up
We're using that.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
That's what,
yeah,
that's what I'm
oh,
saying.
yeah.
They heat up the roadway, and they put down one layer which is like, completely flattens it out and kind of gets into the cracks of
Yep.
everything, and then they'll come along with like their second layer
Yeah.
on top of it. It's so efficient,
It is.
and
And
you really
every-
see how much roadway gets done in a short period of time.
By
and it's
doing it
incredible.
that way.
Nija and I have been going around, and one of the things that we talk about when we get somebody who comes to the door, canvassing. And we both love canvassing. Maybe you can tell by our personalities. We don't like it on a hot day. The first district is vast. It's a long way to walk.
Not
There-
always sidewalks.
We don't have enough candidates who are, actively. It's just been a little bit of a challenge. But when we do get to the door, besides saying about the mill rate and the taxes and the fiscally sound accreditation that we've gotten, and a popular mayor and a well-functioning aldermanic board, we say, and look, the roads are paved. I mean, you can't help but notice.
Right.
And the schools have improved, and we have in our district, we have 2 schools that have gotten the exemplary awards. One of them your son is in,
Yep.
Orange Avenue School. And
I will be making sure that
Matson.
I say that this evening, as a
But
matter of fact.
we mentioned the paving, and
Yes.
some of that paving has been done because, I guess, we've allowed, you have to trust your department heads to come forward and say what it is, the equipment they need in the budget, and then give it to them. And I don't take that lightly. And I'm thinking challenges that we have that we know from the first district. The rest of the town has the beautiful waterfront. We don't have that in the first district, and the waterfall in the center of town and the shoreline. But it's a beautiful area. And the leftover hills and farms and spread out
trees.
houses and trees is just a jewel. Eisenhower Park is a jewel.
Yes.
So many towns across the country would welcome an area that big, that isolated, that diverse. You can have horseback riding and a children's playground and trails. And we now have Steve Johnson, in the last couple of years, that open space position was made wisely. Some far-reaching, thoughtful aldermanic board before my time put in that position, so that he's helping us to know our open space, to use it properly, and to advertise it. But anyway, there are challenges to that. And in some ways, when you have an area that isn't developed yet, there can be develop, grand list, sewers. And it has to be very carefully done.
Yes.
I believe in development. I'd like to see some
Smart development.
local produce, that type, maybe even a restaurant up there, and some of that land that was used in the 70s, thinking suburbia. Some of that on Wheelers Farm Road is ripe for some smart development that young professionals would welcome. But there are also risks, and I have had to stake out some concern for tree cutting and vegetation management, and make sure that there's somebody watching the public purse on aggressive vegetation management. And that's something, or else it's gone.
Right, and we want to develop. We need to develop for the amount of people that we have now and want to have. We need affordable housing, we need restaurants, we need grocery stores, but we don't need to develop every piece of land that exists.
And we don't need garish lighting and signage. So you need a thoughtful group of people.
That sounds like Brian Anderson talking, right?
Does he? He doesn't like garish signage either. That's why we're buddies.
And garish
Well,
light, I'm big on garish light. If you've ever lived in a place where the light comes into your window, then it's the worst, and you know that.
I think
Remember the Seinfeld
Yep.
episode with Kramer with
The
the
chicken.
Chicken,
in the condo.
I do think, you know what, and that your area is literally one of the last bastions, because the lower half of Milford is very well developed. I know there's been much as far as some of the business turnover, as far as some of the properties that had been around for a long period of time are getting developed. But like you said, it's a concern of people's that we manage it appropriately, and that it's not a free for all.
Right.
And the affordable housing is an issue. I think our legislators, both Gail, Senator Schlossberg, and Kim Rose, our representative, did very good work about affordable housing. Number one, in understanding it, in bringing Larry Butler to our town, who's the head of the housing committee, and explaining how Milford was different, making a case that we do need affordable housing, and that is very different than developers who want overly dense housing under the guise of using the affordable statute. So that's too complicated for this discussion now, but we did get a modification of the law and a successful overturn of a governmental veto, which is quite a coup. And so kudos to those two very able legislators, even though I differ with them on the Hartford budget, but that's another subject.
We've discussed about obviously Milford and where we are, and we're in a different spot than where the state is. And
About affordable housing, Dominic?
no, I'm talking about
He's
the budget.
he has moved on to the budget.
No, I'm sunshined on affordable housing until after the elections are done. So there's no more words that I have coming out of my mouth as far as that's concerned.
And why is
Affordable
that?
housing.
Because I cause enough problems anyway, so it's all
I
right.
think you always need to have someone bring it up, though. I think that's important.
Yes. No, I
No, there's
pushed.
so much misunderstanding.
There-
We
there-
almost
there's-
need a position paper saying,
I think that would
this
be
is-
great, position
and
paper.
this is what it is, this is what it is not, this is what the new law modifications say.
Right.
These are the implications, almost like a decision tree.
Yes.
And now these are the challenges.
Right,
And there are
because you want
many.
to protect it, but you don't want anyone getting the loopholes.
will-
And there's also a difference
I
between
will tell
affordable
you,
and low-income housing.
I actually, a couple weeks ago, I had a full hour-long conversation with the Commissioner of Housing, which I asked for, and she put in all the people, in her administration on the phone call.
Mention her name.
Yvonne Klein,
Okay, Commissioner Klein.
Commissioner Klein. And
always
it
wanna
was
give credit.
it was a very productive discussion. I know her history. Obviously, I've been thoroughly involved in this down in Darien, and she was able to bring the needed level of affordable housing to Darien, which is a very difficult community, much like ours. Shoreline, mature. There are parts of it that are very wide open in between the spaces of it. I have certain ideas that I vetted that were important. And she, at the end of the conversation, we had a long conversation about obviously affordable housing. At the end of the day, she told me, look, either you're going to try to put together a plan to be able to proactively look at this and look at your city and figure out where it's best going to be suited for it, and on what's the best mixture of what you want to do, or you're going to be chasing points.
I like that.
And so it helped me with some of my perspective. One of the ideas, that came out of this as far as like the overall, and this is something that when I looked at the statute, I had ideas that I came up with, which was to be able to offer amnesty for people who have in-law apartments. Because in-law apartments count as affordable housing, but they have to be deeded appropriately, and
They have to be part of the deed
deed
inventory,
right.
which is the problem.
And then you
Right.
also have to have, there's checks that come every few years. Somebody comes to make sure that you're up to code. And I know because we had considered doing that for my mother-in-law, and ours technically is not an in-law suite set up because there's not a separate entrance, but she has like her own wing, which is what works better for us.
Which is what Trumbull did. They actually offered an amnesty program for their people. I mean, some of the other things, and it's not to diminish the fact that there's always a need for affordable housing, and affordable housing is not low-income housing.
So we need both of those.
Right.
We need
It's,
low-income housing as well.
Yeah.
It's
And,
affordable housing is technically working class housing, and family housing that there isn't enough of, which is
Right.
what some of the changes were written into law to give more points when people do like 3-bedroom
Right.
affordable housing, which is next to nothing.
In my world, there was a saying, and I think this goes for affordable housing too. When professors who teach in universities and colleges can't afford to send their children to the colleges
That
and
they were-
universities, you've reached a critical mass. And so,
agree.
likewise, with housing, the great World War II boom with affirmative action for GIs, and it all worked and it was wonderful. But now we have, and not just in Milford, towns that we've developed that we live in that our own children can't afford to live in.
Exactly.
And there has to be some really interesting and think tank dialogue about how to do
Yes.
that and how to do that well without making it absolute and without making people take advantage, such as some
Right.
developers.
Right.
I say that on TV, you know. they're just-
Oh, I have no qualms about it. You know what?
truth doesn't need to be,
It distresses me when they take an acre lot and they stick 15 units in a residential, and it doesn't fit in with the community
Right.
and with what's surrounding. And there
And it
are
makes
parts of
it-
planning and zoning that can make those distinctions too.
Right. Because that's not
I
good
thi-
for the people who are going to move in either.
No.
It's not good for
And
anyone.
I think it creates a backlash. And if there's a risk to affordable housing that people are fearful and they're afraid that people are going to come in who don't take care of the houses in the same way, those are real fears. Whether they're legitimate or not, they're real fears. And they need to be addressed and concerned. And sometimes I think unilateral decisions whip up that backlash to then it's more difficult to manage.
Yeah, and you need to explain it because
this is
maybe
hard
you
work.
know better.
It is.
It's hard work of developing
A
good
city.
and affordable places to live and wonderful, you know.
It is. It is. It's
And, yeah.
complicated. But you know what? I as I say, my point to all of that I've advocated for was not only to help change some of the law and to lobby that, and I lobbied that with friends of mine that didn't exactly appreciate the fact that I went and lobbied it. And they actually said to me straight up, you know, you can ask me for just about anything else, but don't ask me for a vote on this. I said, I'm fine with, you know, you voting no on it. I said, just don't block it. I said, I don't care. Just don't block it. And they were good to their word. They didn't block it. And so, you know, I think this is an important issue. I think it's an important discussion. I think it's an important discussion that I brought it obviously directly to our leadership in this city. And, you know, I might speak out because I think that it has to come up in conversation one way or the other for people to be able to come out with a position. And
Exactly.
if somebody doesn't say those things,
Then it's not going to be talked about.
right,
And it has to be.
yeah.
I'd like to see us in the all of the boards. Maybe there's, and this is my bias, my background. There's a little bit more of an educative role that we should be playing.
I agree.
I remember I asked the mayor a year ago. I watched him give testimony, as did Kim Rose, on the affordable housing a year ago. I thought, your grasp of the issue, what it means, too bad we can't write that as a position paper, and should come from the aldermen. Maybe it'd be the aldermen who are in the majority. This is why. This is what we're thinking of, so that there would be whatever it is, a nuisance thing, LED lighting. This is why, and this is what we think, and then people could understand how we're thinking. I think that's the way I thought a caucus would work.
Yes, I agree.
You know, really to come, not to, I mean, I don't have a pathological need to agree. That I think can be very limiting. But some sense of going through the issues
Explaining.
and explaining, and then we go from there. But anyway.
Well, no,
yeah,
I mean,
so
I
maybe
look at
that's
that. You
something
know
I'll
what?
change on the.
That's
If
me
I'm
personally.
reelected.
If I'm elected.
Personally, I mean, that's one of the things that I did was I went and I talked to individuals after certain votes, and I explained exactly where I was about certain things, and you know, they were able to express to me. I mean, obviously offline, and I'm not using any names like here, quite obviously, where they were at with it, and you know what? I appreciate those conversations. I think sometimes you have to have some in public that help get the conversation started, and then you follow up with them in
You need
private
some
in order to be
private
able.
in the caucus, but then you could publicize a little more because people now we are reading social media more, but the newspaper articles, the places where people get information, in some ways you could make a case is getting less reliable.
Definitely.
And more sporadic, and somebody gets a little bit here, even about the budget in Hartford. There is misinformation about the budget. And if we could come out and say, these are the things that we're looking at, and these are the risks to having too austere a budget. And yes, the educational cost sharing is a primary issue for municipalities, but the unintended consequence of that might be this, and really have a discussion.
It's-
So it
And
could be a dialogue.
and we haven't had that.
Well, and I don't think that
not who-
cities do it. I don't think
Some
that
do.
federal. I think it's a problem in government. Period. Some are better than others. Some cities are better than others. Even if you just look at a city's website, you know, the government website, some give so much more information than others. There's nothing unilateral about it, and I like that Milford is good about it. I would like for it to be better about it. Civic engagement is down in general and has been for
Right.
decades, and
And
so
cynicism is
right
tough,
has
even when
taken it,
times
and I
are good.
understand that too. But the only way it can get better is if the people have more information, and so I would look to the government, our legislative bodies, to put that out. Like you said, whether it was a position paper, tell me why you are doing this thing that I don't have power and control over as a constituent. Tell me why and explain it to me so we can have a dialogue. Maybe I'll disagree with you, but I'll understand why, and maybe I will convince you to look at it my way and to vote differently. And that's something that's missing in general, but I think that that's something that specifically the Board of Alders can make better.
Well, I know
And
on the
the
state
crisis-
level is, and here's the difficulty that I look at it, and you know, I call some of this stuff, I call it kabuki.
If you're calling it that, it's probably appropriate.
It's theatrical at times, and there are some parts that are appropriate, but there isn't the level of transparency that you get a 1,000-page document, you know, a few hours before you
exactly.
vote on it.
That's ridiculous.
You can't go through something and to have a full analysis of it and a full understanding of where it's at and what's involved in it. And so you're going to have some people that are going to come out and they're going to quickly go here, 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 and here.
I happen to have with me the ordinance that we're doing tonight, and there are a few operational definitions. So it says,
So
in
it
the,
explains to people
explains
what it
in one
is?
sentence, hydraulic fracking, what it is. And fracking isn't used as it's any extraction
Right.
of and the waste that comes from it. But they have about 5 or 6 terms. So then you would have, because people, are they against fracking, they're for fracking, maybe you don't even know what it is.
Exactly.
And that's what happens. I watched recently, this week, it makes me sad because I devoted a lot of my adult life trying to work for a better healthcare system. They had on TV an interview talking to somebody, and some pundit was talking about the public option and the single payer. And I thought, we're no further along in our understanding of that as the general person,
Right.
what that means. And
How they're different.
Hillary and Bill Clinton started in '92, so we've been
You
non-discussing
probably understand.
that.
You probably understand what an IPIC is. Nobody else is going to get that one. But yes, I did healthcare management as my degree. So we did healthcare policy.
But it's not funny, and we've spent billions, and people are at risk because we didn't really do a good job of educating what it was
public.
we were trying to
I think
conceive.
people don't get a full
that's-
understanding of
that's a
what they
missed-
have until they're about to lose it.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, the ACA, Affordable Health Care Act, is important when you realize you have a pre-existing condition or you've been able to get like health insurance,
or
and
something
you don't
gone
want
wrong.
to, you don't
Right.
want to, you don't want to lose it.
A physician whom I'm friendly with, who I was to see in the last year, said to me, all I know is I want the government out of my practice. And he has a 95% clientele on Medicare
Good luck with
who's
that one.
paying the bill. You know, so the financing of healthcare is different than the intrusion in healthcare. and everything.
absolutely.
But you know, somebody could say that with a serious face. Means we haven't teased out those issues. But anyway, so maybe local politics we can do that a little bit better. 'cause,
Politics can work better from the bottom up. Absolutely.
Well, I know we only have like 4 or 5 minutes, so I'd like to
Okay.
give you a couple minutes that you guys can talk to your constituents, and I'll do my
What,
final
should we tell
wrap-up.
them how we go? What we're saying to constituents? We've had a lot of talk about learning. When you start to learn, we're trying to win 2 seats in a district. So there are challenges there.
There are 3 seats available, and Ellen and I would like 2 of them. That's what it comes down to, and it comes down to votes. Like just like saying politics works from the bottom up. It's not just a slogan. Just like every vote counts. It's not just a slogan. In municipal elections, that is how it is won or lost. There are people. Which one of the things that's been great, and I'm sure for you too, is all of the experience, all of the knowledge, all of the tips we've been told by Ellen and all the other people in the Democratic Alderman board who've been telling us what it's like and what they go through and how they won or lost by a few votes. We need everyone to come out and vote Tuesday, November 7th.
But it's been a learning process and a fun and a team building
has,
process
absolutely.
for Nija and I. We have a whole grand plan for the whole first district.
Oh, yeah.
If we just could do it,
I want to change the charter. I don't think people should be afraid of changing charters. The best thing about the Constitution is that the Founding Fathers knew that it might not work forever the way it was. So it's okay to open it and change it. Challenge isn't a bad thing. And I feel like Democrats and everyone, but especially Democrats, have forgotten that. Challenge isn't bad. Challenge makes us better. It doesn't have to be aggressive. And I want to change the charter. I want
think
the
the way it
alders
goes now, this
instead of
is-
aldermen. We should be alders.
I'm willing to admit on TV something I don't know. So that's also part of politics, or should be. Good
That's
politics.
important.
The problem with the charter is that if you open it, you need a supermajority or a 2/3 majority to open it. But once you open it, all you need is a simple majority to add other things on. So I think that the risk is once you open it
Right.
to change something, then you could.
It's very
They
easy
change everything. That's a very simplistic way. But there are. It's not just a reluctance to open the charter. There can be a real risk which has to be managed. But that doesn't mean
Well,
it
maybe
can't
we
be
could
done.
change it so a supermajority is what it takes, not just to open it, but to add things to it. That's what's great about opening a document to change it. But
anyway,
it's 2017. They should be alders, not aldermen. Like New Haven changed it. We should change it. Something that's very passionate for me is education.
Do we have to change the charter to
Right.
call ourselves alders?
Alders.
I would say no. And why give people a chance to vote against that? And then you're stuck. Sometimes you don't ask.
I like to ask. I'm very big about confrontation. I don't think confrontation has to be bad either. And the things I'm passionate about are healthcare, education, and voting rights. And I think that a problem that I know is in Bridgeport and probably many other cities is that when the city council or selectmen or board of aldermen make a budget for the Board of Education, if the money is not doled out appropriately, which doesn't mean equally because different schools need different amounts, if it's not done right, there's no repercussion. So instead, they say, well, you're not spending the money right, so we're not going to give you that money. And then everyone in the schools suffer. Instead, I think like the way money is often given, there need to be parameters.
Well,
But you have to change the charter to do that.
There's also like things that
I
they
think
do.
we
like
differ
in-
here just a little bit.
Yeah, and as far as budgeting goes, and I know I've dealt with multi-million-dollar budgets. A lot of times you get close to the end of the year, and there's a certain amount of maneuvering in between different funds that you have where you get to be able to adjust it. But I know I got my 1 minute up here.
We got
so
1 minute.
I got my 1 minute to say my final statements, and my final statement really has to do with my 91-year-old grandmother, who I am extremely upset with people who actually went around and ripped off signs from her lawn that I put up. And I put up those lawn signs because she wanted to show her support for me in my candidacy and for the people that she believed in. And, to put somebody in fear over that is just so highly inappropriate.
It's terrible.
And to think that anybody on either side of the aisle that wants to feel so much of a political divide, if you got an issue, you know what? You can call me. And I'd be happy to come out and meet with you and have a discussion with you, and you could give me your opinion on anything. But do me a favor. I'm not going to rip down anybody's signs, and I expect you not to do the same to me.
Can I be a healer on this? I think I know somebody, another Alder, wiser than me, told me that political signs for years are stolen. Kids like them. You go to a friend, I have a friend who has McGovern stickers in his room. He stole that from someplace. Sometimes I think it's non-intentional. A woman across the street from me was irate because somebody stole her Trump sign. This is in the national election. And she was huffing and puffing down the block and on Facebook and how awful it was. I thought, she must think
Because you were
a Democrat. So, and many people who have been back as alders a long time said it was such a problem that they used to build into the cost of making the lawn signs that a certain percentage of them were going to be stolen. So I'm not saying it's not right, but it may not have.
I guess
Hopefully
I'd
it's
have
not
less of an
aggressive.
issue if they didn't leave the stands there and they just ripped. If they took the whole
so they
stands with them, they actually ripped.
That's terrible.
Yeah,
Politics
so that's my
shouldn't
issue.
be
But that's-
divisive
Okay.
even when you disagree.
That's all right. We can run the street. He's gonna.